I recently uploaded a video talking a little bit about Metal Gear Solid 2, Metal Gear Solid 1, actually, and how much fun I had playing through the original PS1 game. I've always felt the original has this really cool, unique vibe. I love the characters. I love the plot. I love the setting. The writing is reasonably good. The voice acting is entertaining. The bosses are wild and creative. And there are issues to be had with the game for sure. Most of it due to its age. I don't like the stealth. I think the combat isn't all that well thought out. I think it's the aiming kind of sucks. There are things to point out about Metal Gear Solid that just don't work. But as a whole, this is a classic for a reason. It was extremely cutting edge for the time and remained a beloved classic for quite some time after that. But, one of the things I pointed out in my review was how dated it felt and how I feel like within the next 10 years, it's going to fade into obscurity as like kind of a relic of the 90s, right? And I think that that's already started happening to a certain extent. Seeing how unenthusiastic people are about Hideo Kojima's future projects and seeing how gaming has evolved since then. Like Metal Gear Solid, in a lot of ways, is no longer special. But, I am an advocate for the game. I still do think it deserves its place in history. It is. It's a good game. I really enjoy Metal Gear Solid for what it is. It's not the best game ever made, but it doesn't need to be. It's a fun, enjoyable action spy thing that I really, really enjoy. Metal Gear Solid 2, in comparison, is Death Stranding before Death Stranding was a thing. Metal Gear Solid 2 is the subversive, woke Japanese game of the early 2000s. It's kind of crazy to kind of think about it in this context. Playing this game in the current year and see like now that I'm older and have a bit more knowledge of this kind of thing. Metal Gear Solid 2 at the time of release was seen as this like major deal because of like the technological advancements, because of the gameplay improvements and because of the postmodernist story, right? The idea that Raiden is some loser who can't live up to Solid Snake and how he has to kind of become his own person and stuff like that. How the game is basically just a giant rehash of the original, right? To me, playing this game for the first time, I hated it, right? It's garbage. It's not fun to play. It looks nice. There are things that are like technically better than the original, but the long and short of it is like I prefer one, I prefer three. Two was always one that I absolutely despised. But the one thing that I really, really went to bat for initially was this idea that like the game had like some deep message behind it, right? The game was trying to tell us something, man, about how the government tries to control us through mass media and how people are manipulated to believe things, and it's all really, really impactful and well implemented, right? Even now that I understand that like a lot of this stuff was talked about in better material, made before this. This is a video game, right? A lot of these topics were never talked to in a video game before. And I think a big part of why Metal Gear Solid got a reputation for being so high IQ was because of its willingness to talk about subjects like this. Its willingness to go think outside the box and really make something really radical and different. But in a lot of ways, because the future Metal Gear Solid 2 predicted is here, the game also feels really dated and ridiculous by modern standards, right? Back in the day, people hated Raiden for being a replacement to Snake. And today, I hate him because it comes off almost like the same exact playbook that modern woke writers in Hollywood utilize in their own films. The idea of replacing the iconic male hero and replacing him with some effeminate soy boy. Hollywood uses a girl, but like it's this what they're doing with Metal Gear Solid 2 is like the same method of just like, establishing a character, making him iconic, and then replacing him with this replacement that nobody asked for and nobody wanted, right? Raiden doesn't make any sense. He's not supposed to be there. He doesn't know anything about the mission. Like, he's just doing everything because he's told to. The things that make him different from Snake or his like relationship drama with Rose, and just how much of a klutz he can be, right? Like Raiden doesn't really resonate with the player as like a compelling video game protagonist. He is like an anti-protagonist, right? He's supposed to be the player, right? He's supposed to be someone that you don't really respect or care about. Like the idea that they replace Snake with this guy is meant to antagonize you. It's very similar to what Hollywood movies do today, right? It's very similar to the woke playbook. And looking at it from that lens, it's something that I resent far more than I used to, right? Because I didn't used to have a problem with Raiden when I first played this game specifically. When I first played this, I was more fixated on like what was actually happening and the gameplay and stuff like that. What the game was trying to do. But like now that I know, now that I've tried to play Metal Gear Solid 2 several times, like the reality is when you really think about this iconic PlayStation 2 classic, the game that everyone was hyped up for, when the console first launched, it's really not good at all. Like there's really nothing about this game that works. You can argue that like, the animations are good, like the new features are good, like, I noticed when I was doing like the bomb thing that like, oh yeah, the hiding locations are kind of clever. I was there were things that I noticed that are like interesting about the game, especially for the time period when it came out. But like when you look at the actual product, when you look at the plot, when you look at like what the selling point is supposed to be, that you're supposed to be a guy infiltrating this facility, what you get is this really underwhelming product that just meanders on and doesn't really say anything. When you compare it to Metal Gear Solid 1, where characters have like really long expositionary dialogue, right? But it all means something. When Meryl gets brainwashed by Psycho Mantis, it has an impact. You have to fight her. You have to deal with that cutscene, like, and then like this really creative sequence plays out, and then you fight Sniper Wolf, and like, you Meryl gets shot, and like, the things that happen in Metal Gear Solid 1 have real impact. You can argue like some of it doesn't work and it meanders on, and like, like I said, like I mentioned when I played the game on stream that like Meryl comes off kind of like a girl boss by modern standards, and but like, which I don't really like. I There are things about Metal Gear Solid 1 I don't like, but as a whole, all of it comes together really well to make a really fun, compelling, interesting experience for what it is. Metal Gear Solid 2 doesn't really do that. It's like it's trying not to be a fun video game. Instead of making a fun, interesting experience, Kojima and friends are trying to tell you that, like, oh, we have something really deep to tell you, when in reality, it basically just amounts to what, like, people on Twitter are saying now. You're like, AI bad. Like, it's just like, yeah, okay, Kojima, okay. And, like, you can argue that, like, the game is forward thinking if you want. And I suppose it has its place in history for that reason, but at the same time, like the question we have to ask on gamers in regards to this kind of situation, just as I did with Spec Ops The Line and BioShock and The Last of Us, a lot of this slop that's supposed to like be great because it's emotionally draining, like the game is supposed to be fun. This idea of like subverting your expectations and that's somehow supposed to like get some great point across. It doesn't work if the audience isn't engaged with it. Like I think, truly I do, that a lot of what Metal Gear Solid tried to accomplish could have worked if they had implemented it all better. But the truth of the matter is that it doesn't work. You're infiltrating a facility that doesn't have anywhere near the charm or creativity of Shadow Moses, right? Shadow Moses has like all these really cool like locations, right? You're in Alaska, you're in this facility, military base that has all these different like layouts. There are tanks around, cameras, there are all these really interesting traps and like situations like, oh, a door froze over because of the cold, so you have to like go find a new route, right? Things like that. The big shell doesn't have any of that. It's the same location over and over and over again. and you have to backtrack through it. It's just not well designed. It's not interesting. It's not cool to look at, right? You're off the coast of New York, but you would never know it, right? Like just playing the game. Like I thought to myself, like, wow, like this is supposed to be taking place in New York City, and it doesn't feel like it at all. Like not a bit. So like when you think about things like that, when you think about what Metal Gear Solid, 1 was like and what 2 is like in comparison, what you can't come away with anything other than a complete and abject disappointment. Yes, there are things about Metal Gear Solid 2 that are interesting, but they're all bogged down by the fact that the game as a whole does not work. If Kojima really wanted to emphasize what a genius he was, what a mad lad he would have been able to get these themes across while still making a fun, entertaining game that was not an inferior rehash of the original.